Hello, I'm Dr. Q. Welcome to my channel. This is the 10th class of Principles of Economics. In this video, I cover own price elasticity of demand and supply. In the end of the class, you're supposed to be able to calculate and interpret the elasticity coefficient, understand the relationship between price elasticity of demand and total revenue, and identify determinants of elasticities. In Lecture 6, we'll learn the law of demand, which specifies a negative relationship between price and the quantity demanded. The higher the price, the fewer goods, services the consumers can afford. In Lecture 7, the law of supply tells us that there is a positive relationship between price and quantity supplied, which means the price and quantity the sellers want to offer move to the same direction. So far, we learned the quality change, which means we know that when price changes, to which direction will the quantity change? Increase or decrease? We don't know how much the quantity change. Elasticity helps us to answer the question. In particular, we're curious to know when price changes by 1%, how big is the percentage change in quantity, holding everything else constant. Now, let's think about the word elasticity. When you come across the term elasticity, what do you think of? Do you relate the word to the picture on the left or the one on the right? The one on the left is a rubber band. It's very stretchy. If you apply force onto it, it will change the shape in response to the force. The one on the right is a coffee mug, made out of porcelain or bone china. It will not change the shape when force is applied. When handled improperly, it will crack or break. The term elastic is a term more associated with the rubber band on the left. In economics, the most common elasticity is price elasticity. Taking price elasticity of demand as an example, it measures buyers' responsiveness to price changes. If price changes by 1%, consumers change their purchase dramatically, and therefore quantity demanded changes by a significant amount, like 10%. Then we say the quantity is very sensitive, very responsive to the price change. We say the demand is elastic. On the other hand, if price changes by a certain percentage, quantity demanded barely changes any, we say the consumers is insensitive, irresponsive to the change of price. The demand is inelastic. Let's look at several goods. The ones on the left are quite different from the ones on the right. But in what perspective? The first item is a shaker of salt. Do you know the average price for a shaker of salt like that? It's about 90 cents. If the price of this salt increases, say by 10%, which is a whole 9 cents, will that change your purchase or consumption behavior of salt dramatically? Probably not by much. I'm confident to say that there are a good number of people who won't notice the price change. They probably do not even know the exact price of salt in the first place, let alone a few cents change. Even if the price change is noticed, people still consume pretty much the same amount of salt every day. I mean, it's salt. You need it for flavor. That's it. Other things like tissue paper or toothpaste, for those products, they share the same characteristics. First of all, they are necessity. Our life won't be convenient without toothpaste or tissue paper. I guess that's why people hoard tissue paper in the pandemic. And there barely is any perfect substitute. Secondly, they are inexpensive. The products on the right are different. Firstly, the expenditure on these items will account for a huge percentage of your income or wealth. A house like that can easily cost one somewhere between $200,000 and $600,000, depends on where you are. 10% change of this price range will be $20,000 to $60,000, which is a big amount of money and definitely influence people's purchase decision. Second of all, you can easily find cheaper substitutes for the big house and luxury car. As opposed to buying a big house, one can rent an apartment, and there are many more affordable economy vehicles than a Mercedes. I hope intuition is established after discussing the several examples. Now let's formalize the definition of elasticity by formulas of calculating elasticity coefficient. There are two formulas to calculate elasticity coefficient. We use capital E as elasticity and subscript D as demand for the abbreviation of price elasticity coefficient for demand. The first formula is percentage change formula. The denominator is the percentage change in price for the product we're interested in. X here can represent any good or service. The numerator is the percentage change in quantity demanded in response to the price change. For example, a restaurant increases the average meal price by 10% and finds that the quantity of meals demanded decreased by 20%. What's the price elasticity of demand coefficient for the restaurant meal? We simply plug the numbers into the formula. The price increased by 10%. The denominator is positive 10%. The economic meaning of the positive sign is that there is an increase. The quantity correspondingly decreased by 20%. The numerator is negative 20%. Negative sign here indicates decrease. What we do about the percentage sign? They cancel out. And the final answer is negative 2. You can conclude that the coefficient for price elasticity of demand for the restaurant meal is negative 2. With this percentage formula, knowing two variables, we can figure out the third one. If we move the percentage change of price to the left-hand side, the percentage change in quantity can be figured out by multiplying elasticity of demand and percentage change in price. Using the restaurant meal example, negative 2 is the elasticity coefficient. Multiplying with percentage change in price, positive 10%, the numeric part is negative 20, and then we just add a percentage sign behind it. Negative 20% is the percentage change in quantity. Lastly, percentage change in price can be figured as percentage change in quantity divided by elasticity coefficient of demand. Negative 20% divided by negative 2 is 10%. Let's do a practice. Please pause and come back for answer. Alright, This question tells us the price elasticity coefficient of demand is -4. Percentage change in price is 5%. Then percentage change in quantity can be figured out by the product of the two, which is -20%. There are several advantages to use percentage change as opposed to absolute value change. A change in the price of a $30,000 car by $1 is very different than a change in the price of a $1 shaker of salt by $1. But if we're talking about a 1% change, then there is a proportional change in price. We can make comparison across very different goods or services. And elasticity is a unit-free measure. It does not matter you use dollars or cents or euros or yens to specify the price. It does not matter how you measure the quantity either. Using percentage change provides us unit-free measure. The next question is that, alright, we know how to calculate the elasticity coefficient, but what those number means? How do we interpret the elasticity coefficient? Here's how we categorize the elasticity. Because of law of demand, we know that price and quantity moves to the opposite direction, which means price increases, quantity demanded decreases, while price goes down, quantity demanded goes up. Therefore, the numerator and denominator for calculating coefficient of price elasticity of demand always move to the opposite direction, always resulting in a negative number, or at most 0. I'll talk about the unique situation when price elasticity of demand equals 0 later. In order to compare the elasticities and interpret, we need to first convert the negative number into absolute value. The absolute value is simply the magnitude of a numeric value. If the absolute value of price elasticity coefficient of demand is larger than 1, it means that the percentage change in quantity is larger than the percentage change in price, indicating that consumers are responsive to the price change by adjusting the amount of goods or services purchased. In previous example, price increases by 10%. Consumers decrease the consumption by 20%. The elasticity of demand is -2, and absolute value is 2. We say that the demand for restaurant meal is elastic. Consumers are responsive and sensitive to the price change. If absolute value of price elasticity coefficient of demand is 1, then the quantity percentage change is identical to the price percentage change. We say the demand is of unit elastic. If absolute value of elasticity coefficient is smaller than 1, the quantity percentage change is not as big as percentage change in price. Demand is inelastic. Let's get an intuitive feeling about the elasticity with a graphical expression. We have 4 demand curves here. The one on the left is very steep, and the one on the right is very flat, while the middle ones are somewhere in between. Intuitively, which demand is the most elastic one and which is the most inelastic one? Let's make the price change by the same amount and look at the quantity change. We can see that the quantity changes the most on D and the smallest on A. It means that the consumers are very responsive to price change on D and not so responsive or sensitive to price change on A. If we push A into an extreme situation, have a completely vertical demand curve, then no matter how price change, the quantity demanded is a fixed number. Consumers are completely irresponsive to price change. The elasticity coefficient is 0. Under this scenario, we say that the demand is perfectly inelastic. An example would be like medicine, such as a diabetic demand for insulin, or transplant patients' demand for CellCept, or allergy patients' demand for EpiPen. The EpiPen is a potential life-saving medication for patients who experience severe allergic reactions. Consumers who need the medicines have to purchase the dosage prescribed by the doctor. It's not like you take plenty of the medicine when price is low and take a lower dosage when price is high. In 2007, the cost for a set of 2 auto-injectors of EpiPen was about $94. In 2016, the cost for an EpiPen kit pair of 2 pens is over $700. Before cheaper alternative medicine is found and allowed to be produced, patients have no other choice but paying for the high price. Another one is that if we push graph D into an extreme and have a completely horizontal demand curve, it means that a small price reduction will cause buyers to increase their purchases from 0 to all that is possible to obtain. The demand coefficient approaches infinity. Under this scenario, we have a perfectly elastic demand. There barely is any real-world example for perfectly elastic demand, but demand for the firms in purely competitive industry such as agriculture sector in international commodity market is almost perfectly elastic. This will be further covered in market structure part in discussing perfect computation. We learned about elasticity and know how to interpret it. Now the question is, why are we learning this? For businesses or firms, they may want to practice new pricing strategy from time to time. For example, the businesses or firms increase price. But some firms find the total amount of money they collect from selling the products, which is the total revenue, increased, and some find that their total revenue decreased. How is that? Total revenue is the product of the price and the quantity purchased by consumers. And the price of quantity demanded move to the opposite direction, which means there is a trade-off. If the business increases price to increase total revenue, meanwhile, the quantity they can sell will decline and bring the total revenue down. So the net effect on total revenue can be ambiguous. For example, a strawberry farmer sells his strawberries at $3 per box. He can sell 1,000 boxes. The total revenue is $3,000. If farmer increased the price to $3.50 per box, and that does not discourage too many consumers, he sells 900 boxes, then the new total revenue is $3,150, which is higher than the previous total revenue. Assuming the cost of production does not change, the increase in price is a good strategy. But if the price is increased to $3.50, which discourages the consumers from buying dramatically to 500 boxes, then the total revenue decreases dramatically as well. This is not a good pricing strategy. In fact, because price, total revenue, and elasticity are closely related, we can summarize their relationship with this total revenue test. The total revenue test is the easiest way to judge whether demand is elastic or inelastic. This test can be used in place of the elasticity formula, unless there is a need to determine the elasticity coefficient. The total revenue test is important to understand the relationship between price elasticity and total revenue. It is summarized as demand is inelastic if a decrease in price results in a decrease in total revenue, or an increase in price results in a rise in total revenue. Demand is elastic if a decrease in price results in a rise in total revenue, or if an increase in price results in a decline in total revenue. Demand is unelastic if total revenue does not change when the price changes. Let's look at the calculation of total revenue test with a graphical expression. Total revenue is the product of price and quantity. Can be shown by this yellow rectangular area. If price decreases, we can compare the new total revenue against the previous total revenue. We can see that for this relatively flat demand curve, as the price goes down, the gain in total revenue outweighs the loss in previous total revenue, so total revenue increases. Price and total revenue moves to the opposite direction. Demand is elastic. For the relatively steeper demand curve, when price decreases, gain is smaller than the loss in total revenue. Total revenue declines, move to the same direction with price. Demand is inelastic. This is a unelastic demand graphical expression. It's not a straight line. Instead, it shapes like this, convex to the origin. When price decreases, loss and gain in total revenue are the same. Total revenue stays constant. So far, the total revenue test is shown intuitively by the graphs. Now let me prove it. In Lecture 3, I provide an example of the relationship between price of the ticket and the attendance of Carolina Panthers football game. I'm here to use the same example, and this is the hypothetical data. The total revenue is simply the product of the ticket price and attendance. You can pause and check if you can calculate all the total revenue over here. Now we use the second formula, midpoint formula, to calculate the own price elasticity of demand. The midpoint formula has 4 parentheses. The first parenthesis is quantity difference. The second is price difference. The third one is price summation. And the last one is quantity summation. In order to calculate the elasticity coefficient with the midpoint formula, we need 2 price-quantity combinations that are adjacent to each other. For example, the elasticity between point A and B. We assume A is a starting point and B is the ending point. It does not matter if you move from B to A or A to B. Let's write down the price and quantity combination for A and B. Plug into the midpoint formula, and this is what we get. You may want to pause and figure out yourself. So -9 is the elasticity for the demand segment between A and B. We take the absolute value of -9 and it's larger than 1, we can conclude that the demand between A and B is elastic. Here I want to remind you that this is very important for you to calculate the values within parentheses first and then do the calculation outside the parentheses. And you definitely want to do practice and see if you can get the same result yourself. By the same rationale, we can calculate the elasticity coefficient between B and C. Between C and D. Between D and E. And between E and F. I want to say that across the calculations, the values for the part in front of the multiplication sign over here are identical. Because they are the inverse of the slope for the demand curve. Demand curve is straight, slope does not change, and therefore the inverse of slope does not change, so they are identical. The second part is different across different points. In real world, the demand curve may not be a straight line, so the first part may change. This table summarizes everything about the quantity, price, elasticity coefficient, total revenue. A graphical expression will be desirable to provide us their relationships in a straightforward way. Here it is. So on the upper left part of demand curve, where price is high, quantity demanded is low, If price goes down, total revenue goes up. Or price increases and total revenue declines. Price and total revenue move in opposite directions. Demand is elastic. In the middle part, when price changes, total revenue remains constant, and actually total revenue is maximized. Demand is of unit elastic. On the lower right part of the demand curve, where price is low and the quantity demanded is high, if price goes down, so does the total revenue. Or price increases, total revenue also increases. Price and total revenue move in the same direction. Demand is inelastic. Let's do a couple of practice. Please pause and come back. Alright, this question tests total revenue test. There are two situations resulting in total revenue declines. First, price increases and demand is elastic. Second, price decreases and demand is inelastic. A has a combination of increasing price and inelastic demand, does not fit. B has unit elasticity, does not work. C has a combination of decreasing price and demand is elastic, not correct. D has a combination of increase in price and demand is elastic, it is correct. Did you pick the right one? Next, pause and solve yourself. Alright, in order to use midpoint formula, we need to write down the price and quantity combination for each point. For A, price is $14 while quantity is 3. For B, price is $10 and quantity is 5. Plug into the formula. This is the answer. Demand is elastic. Alright, from the discussion of those items, we have some intuition about the characteristics for goods or services that are elastic or inelastic. Now, here is a summary of determinants of price elasticity of demand. First of all, the more substitutes one good or service has, the more elastic the demand is. With the substitutes available, consumers have more alternative options to choose from. So when there is a change in price, there is a greater percentage change in quantity demanded, making the demand more elastic. Candy bars like Kit Kat or soft drinks that consumers can easily switch to a cheaper alternative in general has elastic demand. On the other hand, products like medications or salt, people may have a hard time to find alternative. Demand tends to be inelastic. Please note that demand is inelastic means consumers' purchase decision is irresponsive or insensitive to price change. It does not mean that consumers do not want to switch to cheaper alternative when price goes up for a good or service. Probably there simply is not an alternative to switch onto. Like EpiPen price went up to 7 times within 10 years. Consumers still have to purchase because of lacking cheaper alternative. Therefore, demand for EpiPen is inelastic. The second determinant is the proportion of income or wealth the expenditures of a good or service accounts for. If the monetary value of a good or service is large, like the price of a house or a car, then even 1% change in price is a big amount of money, and consumers tend to be responsive to the change. So demand is elastic. On the other hand, for the goods or services that is inexpensive to buy, price changes by 1% probably won't result in big dollar difference and won't change consumers' purchasing behavior much. The demand is inelastic. The third one, luxuries versus necessities. Generally speaking, luxuries are goods that consumers can go easily without. Consumers will change the amount they purchase by a greater amount, even if the price changes by a small percentage. Luxuries are likely to have elastic demand, while necessities are something consumers cannot live conveniently without. People cannot be very responsive to the price change. Demand for necessities is inelastic. Please note that some necessities can be expensive and accounts for a big percentage of the income wealth, such as medical treatment. But consumers have to purchase as long as it's within their affordability. The demand is still inelastic. The last determinant is time. It takes time to alter the amount being purchased and find cheaper alternative. So the more time available, the more elastic the demand is. A person doing Christmas shopping on Christmas Eve has very inelastic demand because it takes longer time to look around for an alternative purchase. Here, I'd like to offer an example from my personal experience to show that time is an important determinant for price elasticity of demand. About 10 years ago, I had to fly from Beijing, China, back to the state. As opposed to call my travel agent, I decided to book the ticket myself online. And yes, there was brick-and-mortar travel agent then, especially popular for international travel arrangement. So I searched the date and a region-destination combination. Click the first one that pops out, which is of course the cheapest one. I finished the transaction without going through the details of the itinerary. The night before I depart, I read through the details and realized that, oh my God, I have to make a connection at different airports. After landing at JFK at 2:20 p.m., I have to make it to LaGuardia Airport for my next flight that departs at 6:15 p.m. The nearly 4 hours connection time may seem to be adequate, but remember that JFK is the largest airport. There are several big airplanes land at similar time, and there are thousands of people waiting in the line to go through the custom. And by the time I finally get out of the airport, it's the rush hour of New York. At that time, all I could do is grabbing the first taxi I see and jumping in and screaming, LaGuardia Airport, go! I don't have time to care about how much the taxi driver is going to charge me. I don't have time to find any alternative. All I could think of is how to catch my next flight. But if I had more time, I could consider a more economy-friendly way for commute, like a train or bus. But with the limited time, my demand for taxi service is extremely inelastic. Let's do a practice. Pause and come back for the answer. Alright, this question tests the determinant of price elasticity of demand, and option A fits the description of a more elastic demand, while B, C, D result in inelastic demand. Here is a summary of goods or services that have inelastic demand and ones with elastic demand, based upon the related economics research. Please say if they are consistent with your expectation. After learning price elasticity of demand thoroughly, the price elasticity of supply should be very intuitive to understand. Price elasticity of supply measures sellers' responsiveness to price changes. If producers or sellers are responsive or sensitive to price changes, supply is elastic, while producers are not or cannot be responsive to price changes, supply is inelastic. The formulas for calculating elasticity coefficients are identical to the one for demand. There are percentage change formula and midpoint formula. The quantity change now is in supply as opposed to in demand, because the price and quantity supplied move to the same direction, so the numerator and the denominator have the same sign. Therefore, price elasticity of supply is always non-negative. The categorization of price elasticity of supply is consistent with the ones for demand. When elasticity coefficient is larger than 1, supply is elastic, equals 1, unit elastic, smaller than 1, inelastic. When the coefficient is equal to 1, supply is perfectly inelastic. Elasticity of supply is mainly determined by how much flexibility a producer has to adjust the output in response to a change in the price. If the market price increases and producers can respond by easily or relatively cheaply shifting more resources for more production, then the supply is elastic. Otherwise, it's inelastic. It depends on what type of goods or service we're discussing and the particular firm's production capacity. It's more of a case-to-case analysis, but I'm here to provide some intuition. For example, for clothing manufacturers, if price increases because of a high demand, the businesses probably already have stored some of the products. On top of that, the quantity supplied of clothing can be relatively easily increased because the costs of input and labor are unlikely to rise significantly. For businesses like restaurants or spa, the seating capacity is limited at a certain time point. Below the seating capacity, the supply is relatively elastic. Beyond the seating capacity, there is simply no room to increase the quantity supplied, despite the increase in price, at least right at the moment, so supply is inelastic. But most of those constraints can be eased by allowing the businesses or firms to adjust the production with longer time. In firm theory, there are 3 categories of time periods. The first is immediate short run. It means that there is no time for firms or producers to adjust output in response to a price change. So, what is the cutoff value to define a time period as immediate short run? Is it a day, or a month, or a quarter? Well, again, it depends. For example, it's said that it takes at least a year to develop and produce COVID-19 vaccine. At the time of this video is made, there still isn't a vaccine approved for sale in the United States. Then the immediate short run for COVID-19 vaccine is at least a year. Within this time period, no matter how high the demand is, the supply for vaccine of COVID-19 is perfectly inelastic and production level is zero. Different industry has a very different time period as the immediate short run. Some industry may not have an immediate short run if they can store some of their products. If COVID-19 vaccine is developed and approved for public use, then the quantity supplied will change some with respect to the change of price, but the production capacity probably won't be able to meet the huge worldwide need. If a high demand persists, after several years, the producers probably will be able to expand the production capacity, and the quantity supplied will be more responsive to price change. Other than COVID-19 vaccine, facial masks, swabs, hand sanitizers, and other personal protective equipment all follow the same rationale. Here's another example to show that how important the production capacity is to price elasticity of supply. Antiques and other non-reproducible commodities have an inelastic supply. For one-of-a-kind antiques, the supply is perfectly inelastic. This makes their price highly susceptible to fluctuations in demand. The more inelastic the supply, the greater the change in price when demand changes. Reproductions, on the other hand, have a much more elastic supply, so the prices tend to remain lower even when there is an increase in demand. Alright, that's all I have for this video. In next lecture, I will start to cover firm theory. Thank you for watching. Please like and share this video and subscribe my channel for more lectures in economics.